Oh. Well, in that case... Hello and welcome, my three most loyal subscribers, Recep, Khan, and Mustafa. I really appreciate your interest in knowing why the Ottomans were indeed the Roman Empire. To prove it, I have prepared 3 points, each with a special significance to one of you. Let's start with you, Recep. For some reason, I think that you might be very interested in learning why the Ottoman sultans were basically Roman emperors. In most of the sources dealing with this issue, you'd find a line that says something like, after the conquest of Constantinople, Mehmed II started calling himself Kaiser-i Rum, which is Turkish for Caesar of Rome. Of course, calling yourself something doesn't automatically make you that. The important part is whether or not other people acknowledge that title, the thing we call legitimacy. The first and the most obvious legitimating factor of the Ottoman sultans was the right of conquest. As George of Trebizond puts it, he who holds the seat of the empire in his hand is the emperor of right, and Constantinople is the center of the Roman Empire. But understandably, not everyone in Christian Byzantium was happy with the new Muslim management. To address this, the sultans sought the blessing of the Patriarch of Constantinople. 1 year after the conquest, Mehmed II restored the Patriarchate and made its new head, Gennadios Scholarius, the ethnarch of all the Orthodox subjects of the empire. The Sultan's name was added to the liturgical diptychs, and the clergy would pray for his health and reign at every service. Thus, the Ottoman Sultan became acknowledged as the rightful Vasilevs by the same institution that invested the Christian emperors of Eastern Rome. The first few sultans after the conquest were rather serious about their Roman pretensions. The 2 most notable in this regard were Mehmed the Conqueror and Suleiman the Magnificent. For Suleiman, the Roman imperial legacy was the subject of rivalry with the Habsburgs of the Holy Roman Empire. Neither actually held the city of Rome, but both wanted the claim to universal power that the title entailed. The pre-modern conception of Rome comes from the Book of Daniel. Rome is not simply a city, or just another state, but the 4th and the last great earthly kingdom before the kingdom of God is established. So the ruler of this kingdom is the rightful monarch of all the people of the earth. But while for Suleiman, Roman legitimacy might have been just a political instrument or a justification of conquest, Mehmed II's fascination with the ancient empire seems very genuine. His biographies often mention his love for the histories of antiquity, him being inspired by the lives of Caesar and Alexander. Mehmed's ambition was not simply a subjugation, but a revitalization of the Eastern Roman Empire under his rule. The artists from all over the Mediterranean world were invited to Constantinople to bring the city back to her former glory. If the Roman Empire could be Muslim, then Mehmed II would have been its Constantine. But what seals the deal for me in making Mehmed the true Roman Emperor are not the acknowledgements, ambitions, or the military achievements. You see, Mehmed, just like the Roman emperors of antiquity, had, how should I put it, a great appreciation for male beauty. First, there was his lifelong relationship with Radu the Handsome, the younger brother of Vlad Dracula. Radu was a hostage at the Ottoman court, when both him and Mehmed were still boys, and initially the two got off on their own foot. According to Laonikos Chalkokondylas, the Sultan kissed him against his will, and the boy, drawing a dagger, wounded him in the thigh, and immediately fled as far as he could. However, after the Sultan packed up and left, the boy also descended from the tree, and not long after, arrived at the gate and became his favorite. From that point, Radu and Mehmed remained very close, until the former's death at the age of 40. Of course, you might say, the historians are always looking to spice things up, and can easily misinterpret close friendship as romantic involvement. To that, I would just recite a poem that Mehmed wrote about a Frankish man called Jesus that he saw in Galata. A sun-faced angel, the moon of the universe saw I. Those dark hyacinths of his are the lover's sigh. Like the shining moon, the coy cypress had dressed in blacks. It turns out he is the king and beauty of the realm of the Franks. Whoever does not set heart on his monkish girdle's knot is a heretic among lovers, From the folk of faith he is not. To those whom his dimple kills, his lips revitalize. That soul bestower's way is Jesus' religion, I surmise. There I saw him, named Jesus, and Frankish Mehmed. Whoever saw Jesus would say, by his lips is he resurrected. Do not fancy that the bony one submits to you, O AVNI. The king of Istanbul you are, and the king of Galata is he. Having a harem full of women at his disposal, but still dreaming about a pretty boy. If this is not a true successor of Hadrian, I don't know who is. Now let's move on from the personal matters to the matters of the state. Khan, as a man who takes great pride in his country, I believe you'd be especially interested to learn how the Ottoman state was the continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire. First, let's take a look at the Roman Empire way before the Ottomans have entered the stage. This is the map of Eastern Rome in AD 520, 7 years before Justinian I ascended to the throne and embarked on his reconquest of the West. What we see here is a large state that spans the Balkans, Anatolia, Syria and Egypt. And the funny thing about it is that the actual date of the map is not AD 520, it's AD 1520. It's not the Roman Empire before the reign of Justinian the Great. It's the Ottoman Empire before the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent. You'd be forgiven for getting the two mixed up, because their borders are something like 95% the same. I know there are a couple of you who noticed that Crete and Cyprus aren't purple, and figured out the ruse. But I bet there aren't too many. Of course, the borders are not the only thing that defines an empire. There is also the state apparatus, all the officials and bureaucrats who keep the cogs of the government machine spinning. In that regard, the Ottoman government had some Byzantine continuity on every level, from a local tax collector to the highest office below the Sultan. The local administration of the empire remained largely intact, as it was more expedient to keep what was already working fine. The institutions of government followed many Byzantine models, and often continued employing the same people who staffed them before the Ottoman takeover. For instance, the Prenoia system of land grants was rebranded as Iltizam and Timar, but kept its basic premise. The upper echelons of the Ottoman government were also largely staffed by Greeks, Slavs and Albanians, the people who just a couple of centuries ago constituted the population of the Eastern Roman Empire. The Greeks were the most prominent in that regard, due to the high literacy rates of the urban Byzantines. In time, it resulted in the virtual dominance of the Ottoman diplomatic corps by the Phanariots, wealthy Greek merchants from the Phanar district of Constantinople. The Phanariots are unique in that they managed to achieve prominence in the Ottoman government while staying Orthodox Christian. The sultans deemed their services so valuable that they waived the conversion requirement. The most striking example of this Ottoman recruitment practice was the office of the Grand Vizier, the prime minister of the empire. Out of the first dozen viziers after 1453, only one was of Turkish origin. The rest were Slavs, Albanians and Greeks, either willing converts or Devshirme conscripts. Among those were even the descendants of the Byzantine emperors. Mahmud Pasha Angelovich traced his lineage to the Angelid dynasty, and Mesih Pasha was a nephew of Constantine XI. Of course, this wasn't done out of the goodness of Sultan's heart. Before the conquest of Constantinople, Mehmed II had a very rocky relationship with his father's court officials, who tried to sideline him from power. He needed to counterbalance the influence of the Turkish nobility at his court, and create a powerful faction loyal personally to him. That's why he promoted men from outside. Those who owed their position solely to the Sultan were unlikely to scheme against him. This made sense politically, but it also ensured that the statecraft of the empire was not solely the business of the Turks, but of all the Sultan's subjects, provided they converted to Islam. Now, let's go to you, Mustafa. The sultans, the viziers, and the borders on the map are all well and good. But what about the common man? How Roman was the Ottoman Empire on the population level? The answer, depending on the region, ranged from not Roman at all to surprisingly so. First of all, most of the Byzantine population remained in place after the conquest. Some nobles and merchants moved to Italy, Balkans and Russia, but only a few families could afford it. A large portion of the Byzantines already lived under the Ottoman rule for decades by the time Constantinople fell to Mehmed. The demographic information for that period is hard to come by, but it wouldn't be unrealistic to claim that about 40% of the Ottoman population in the 15th century were Orthodox Christians. Of course, this would still be a tenuous claim to having a Roman population. Out of the peoples of the Balkans, only the Greeks retained something of a Roman identity. The Orthodox were all room for the Turks, but not for each other. But there was another facet of Ottoman society that claimed the Roman identity. The word Rum had different meanings depending on the context. Administratively, there was Rumelia in the Balkans and the islet of Rum in northern Anatolia. But culturally, in the Muslim world, the meaning of the word was wider. For the Europeans, the Ottomans were the great Islamic threat from the East, but for other Muslims of the Middle East, they were the Westerners. The Turks were relative newcomers to the Middle East. Their native nomadic ways were looked down upon by the people who boasted of the legacies of the Arabic, Persian, and Greco-Roman civilizations. They may have protected the Islamic Middle East from going under during the incursions of the Crusades and the Mongols, or they may have built successful polities by being receptive of Byzantine institutions and traditions. But ultimately, they were not wielders of culture, other than perhaps the culture of yogurt, and their high art and literature were but an imitation of Arab, Persian, and Byzantine precedent. Due to this perceived inferiority of their culture, the Turkic people of the Middle East were not seen as a united ethnicity, but as split between the two cultural spheres, Rum and Ajam. Ajam was roughly Persia, and Rum was everything to the west of the Taurus Mountains. This double meaning of the word Rum was known at least to the more educated among the Ottoman subjects. When the Admiral Seydi Ali Reis was asked how big were the lands of Rum, his answer was, if by Rum one means Rum strictly speaking, that is the province of Sivas, then Hindustan is bigger. But if one means the lands under the rule of the Emperor of Rum, Hind does not amount to 1/10 of it. When people speak of Alexander having ruled over the 7 climes, that must be like the rule of the Emperor of Rum. Referring to the Ottomans as Rumi was a long-established practice in the Muslim world. Nizamuddin Shami, the chronicler of Timur, writes about his patron vanquishing the Rumiyan at the Battle of Ankara. But the fact that Rum also meant a high cultural standard led to the emergence of a new self-identification among the more educated subjects of the Sultan. The word Turk used to have some negative connotations in the Middle Ages. A Turk was an uncultured wild ruffian of the Anatolian plateau, brave in warfare, but not much suited for civilization. With greater urbanization of the Ottoman society that followed the capture of Constantinople, the more affluent of the Sultan's subjects sought to distance themselves from the uncouth image of a Turk by embracing a Rumi identity. A Rumi was a more sophisticated man, someone who could appreciate fine art and poetry. As Mevlana Chilaudin puts it, cultivation of the world belongs to Rumis, and devastation of the universe is confined to Turks. There was an understanding that this new creed emerged from intermingling between the Christians and the Muslims. Gilibalulu Mustafa Ali writes that those varied peoples and different types of Rumis living in the glorious days of the Ottoman dynasty, who are not separate from those tribes of Turks and Tatars, are a select community and pure, pleasing people, who, just as they are distinguished in the origins of their state, are singled out for their piety, cleanliness, and faith. Apart from this, most of the inhabitants of Rum are of confused ethnic origins. Among its notables there are few whose lineage does not go back to a convert to Islam, either on their father's or their mother's side. The genealogy is traced to a filthy infidel. It is as if two different species of fruit-bearing tree mingled and mated, and the fruit of this union was large and filled with liquid, like a princely pearl. The best qualities of the progenitors were then manifested and gave distinction, either in physical beauty or in spiritual wisdom. Of course, not everyone in the wider Muslim world was receptive to this. For instance, the Moroccan ambassador to Constantinople was rather skeptical of this tendency. But since the word LARP had not yet been invented, he had to be more verbose about it. That city was the capital of the lands of Rome, and the seat of the empire, the city of Caesars. The Muslims who live in this city now call themselves Rum and prefer that origin to their own. Among them, calligraphy too is called Khat Rumi. So this, my friends, is how the Ottoman Empire was a Roman state, with the Roman people and the Roman emperor. Join me next time when we discuss why the Ottoman Empire was not Roman at all. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions left on the topic, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'd like to give special thanks to my Patreon supporters: Mulai Cherkawi, Conventus Orbis, Pikimis, Mikius Porcius, Simon Baumgartner, and others. And for the rest of you, thanks a lot for watching to the end, and I will see you in the next one.